Animal Farm, Chapter 8. A few days later, when the terror caused by the executions had died down, some of the animals remembered, or thought they remembered, that the sixth commandment decreed, "No animal shall kill any other animal," and though no one cared to mention it in the hearing of the pigs or the dogs, it was felt that the killings which had taken place did not square or agree with this. Clover asked Benjamin to read her the sixth commandment, and when Benjamin, as usual, said he refused to meddle or get involved in such matters, she fetched Muriel. Muriel read the commandment for her. It ran, "No animal shall kill any other animal without cause." Somehow or other, the last two words had slipped out of the animal's memory, but they saw now that the commandment had not been violated, for clearly there was good reason for killing the traitors who had leagued themselves with Snowball. Throughout the year, the animals worked even harder than they had worked in the previous year to rebuild the windmill with walls twice as thick as before, and to finish it by the appointed date. Together with the regular work of the farm, was tremendous labor. It was so much work. There were times when it seemed to the animals that they worked longer hours and fed no better than they had done in Jones's day. On Sunday mornings, Squealer, holding down a long strip of paper with his trotter, remember his little piggy foot thing, would read out to them lists of figures proving that the production of every class of foodstuff had increased by 200%, 300%, or 500%, as the case might be. The animals saw no reason to disbelieve him, especially as they could no longer remember very clearly what conditions had been like before the rebellion. All the same, there were days when they felt that they would sooner have had less figures and more food. Now, before you move on, I want you to really think about that. And if we were discussing this, we would just talk about it, but just thinking about it is fine. I want you to really compare these in your mind. All the same, there were days when they felt that they would sooner have had less figures and more food, figures being like numbers. And really compare and contrast that with Benjamin's statement, "I'd sooner have no tail and no flies," remembering that that is one of the ways that we knew that Benjamin was so cynical, was that he wasn't grateful for positive things like having a tail for getting rid of flies, but was just negative about having flies at all. All orders were now issued through Squealer or one of the other pigs. Napoleon himself was not seen in public as often as once in a fortnight or 2 weeks. When he did appear, he was attended not only by his retinue of dogs, his group of dogs, but by a black cockerel or rooster who marched in front of him and acted as a kind of trumpeter, letting out a loud cock-a-doodle-doo before Napoleon spoke. Even in the farmhouse, it was said, Napoleon inhabited separate apartments from the others. So he has like a different room. Maybe he's in like the master bedroom. He took his meals alone with 2 dogs to wait upon him like as servants, and always ate from the Crown Derby dinner service, which had been in the glass cupboard in the drawing room or the living room. It was also announced that the gun would be fired every year on Napoleon's birthday, as well as on the other 2 anniversaries. Now, if you were like me, you didn't know what the Crown Derby dinner service was, I had to look it up. So that would be fancy dishes. And you might have this too. Like maybe there are dishes that you only pull out for Thanksgiving or for Christmas dinner, or maybe you only use them on a special occasion. So these would be those same dishes that would only be used for a special occasion, except Napoleon is acting like every day is a special occasion because it's Napoleon Day. So this just kind of goes to show you how he's trying to put himself above the others. Napoleon was now never spoken of simply as Napoleon. He was always referred to in formal style as our leader, Comrade Napoleon. And the pigs liked to invent for him such titles as Father of all animals, Terror of mankind, Protector of the sheepfold, Duckling's friend, and the like. In his speeches, Squealer would talk with the tears rolling down his cheeks, right, showing emotion, of Napoleon's wisdom, the goodness of his heart, and the deep love he bore to all animals everywhere, even and especially the unhappy animals who still lived in ignorance and slavery on other farms. Now, if you did propaganda for your chapters 4 through 6 projects, these might be things that you would consider adding to your propaganda poster, right? Protector of the sheepfold, duckling's friend. You went to such great extent to show that Napoleon viewed himself and wanted others to view him as very positive. Here are some ways that they did view him as very positively. It had become usual to give Napoleon the credit for every successful achievement and every stroke of good fortune. You would often hear one hen remark to another, "Under the guidance of our leader, Comrade Napoleon, I have laid 5 eggs in 6 days," which would be kind of a lot. Or 2 cows, enjoying a drink at the pool, would exclaim, "Thanks to the leadership of Comrade Napoleon, how excellent this water tastes." The general feeling on the farm was well expressed in a poem entitled Comrade Napoleon, which was composed by Minimus and ran as follows. Friend of fatherless, fountain of happiness, Lord of the swill bucket, oh, how my soul is on fire when I gaze at thy calm and commanding eye, like the sun in the sky, Comrade Napoleon. Thou art the giver of all that thy creatures love, full belly twice a day, clean straw to roll upon. Every beast, great or small, sleeps at peace in his stall. Thou watchest over all, Comrade Napoleon. Had I a sucking pig or a baby, right, like a nursing pig? Had I a sucking pig, ere or before he had grown as big even as a pint bottle or as a rolling pin, he should have learned to be faithful and true to thee. Yes, his first squeak should be, Comrade Napoleon. So basically this is saying, right, if I had a little baby, ere or before he had even gotten as big as like a pint bottle, like a Coke bottle, right? Or as a rolling pin, he would be faithful to Comrade Napoleon. Oh boy. Even the kids would be brainwashed here. Napoleon approved of this poem and caused it to be inscribed or written on the wall of the big barn at the opposite end from the 7 Commandments. It was surmounted or hung up with a portrait of Napoleon in profile, executed or done by Squealer in white paint. Well, hold on. We need to talk about this. So I want you to really think about this. These things are inscribed on the barn. This would be a great place to pause, take a little break to interact with the text, and do a very quick write. What else is inscribed on this barn? Right? It's just the 7 Commandments. So what does the addition of Napoleon's new song and Napoleon's portrait or a picture of him represent? Are these equal in importance to the 7 Commandments? Are they? Should they be? Are they treated as equal? Are they really equal? It's kind of up to you to decide. Meanwhile, through the agency of Whymper, Napoleon was engaged in complicated negotiations with Frederick and Pilkington, remember the neighbor farmers. The pile of timber, or wood, was still unsold. Of the two, Frederick was the more anxious or eager to get hold of it, but he would not offer a reasonable price. So Frederick wanted it more, but he was trying to be a cheapskate about it. At the same time, there were renewed rumors that Frederick and his men were plotting to attack Animal Farm and to destroy the windmill, the building of which had aroused furious jealousy in him. Snowball was known to be still skulking or hanging about on Pinchfield Farm. Remember, we talked about the F and P pair? So Frederick owns Pinchfield Farm. So Snowball is hanging out at Frederick's place at Pinchfield. In the middle of the summer, the animals were alarmed or surprised to hear that 3 hens had come forward and confessed that, inspired by Snowball, they had entered into a plot to murder Napoleon. They were executed immediately, and fresh precautions for Napoleon's safety were taken. 4 dogs guarded his bed at night, 1 at each corner, and a young pig named Pink Eye was given the task of tasting all his food before he ate it, lest it should be poisoned. Wow! Hens wanted to murder Napoleon. Snowball convinced them. I don't know. I think this is worth a second thought. Let's keep reading, though. At about the same time, it was given out or told that Napoleon had arranged to sell the pile of timber to Mr. Pilkington. So, not Mr. Frederick, the other guy, Mr. Pilkington. He was going to enter into a regular agreement for the exchange of certain products between Animal Farm and Foxwood. Foxwood is Mr. Pilkington's farm. The relationships between Napoleon and Pilkington, though they were only conducted through Whymper, were now almost friendly. The animals distrusted Pilkington as a human being, but greatly preferred him to Frederick, whom they both feared and hated. As the summer wore on and the windmill neared completion, I lost my place. The rumors of an impending or upcoming treacherous attack grew stronger and stronger. Frederick, it was said, intended to bring against them 20 men, all armed with guns, and he had already bribed or given money to the magistrates and police so that if he could once get hold of the title deeds of Animal Farm, they would ask no questions. So that means that he got the police and the judges, the magistrates, to agree that if he were somehow to get the piece of paper that says, you own Animal Farm, they would not act like they were surprised. They would be like, oh yeah, of course, Frederick has always owned this farm, da-da-da. Okay. Moreover, terrible stories were leaking out from Pinchfield about the cruelties that Frederick practiced upon his animals. He had flogged or whipped an old horse to death. He starved his cows. He had killed a dog by throwing it into the furnace and the fire. He amused himself in the evenings by making cocks or roosters fight with splinters of razor blade tied to their spurs, to their little feeties. The animals' blood boiled with rage when they heard of these things being done to their comrades, and sometimes they clamored or hollered to be allowed to go out in a body and attack Pinchfield Farm, drive out the humans, and set the animals free. But Squealer counseled them to avoid rash or foolish actions and trust in Comrade Napoleon's strategy. Nevertheless, feeling against Frederick continued to run high. One Sunday morning, Napoleon appeared in the barn and explained that he had never at any time contemplated or thought of selling the pile of timber to Frederick. He considered it beneath his dignity, he said, to have dealings with scoundrels or bad guys of that description. The pigeons, who were still sent out to spread tidings of the rebellion, were forbidden to set foot anywhere on Foxwood, and were also ordered to drop their former slogan of death to humanity in favor of death to Frederick. In the late summer, yet another of Snowball's machinations was laid bare. This is a complicated word that just means plans. It has a connotation of kind of like sneaky evilness. Okay? So to lay bare means it became clear. So basically in the late summer, we see that Snowball's evil plans have begun to come clear. The wheat crop was full of weeds, and it was discovered that on one of his nocturnal nighttime visits, Snowball had mixed weed seeds with the seed corn. A gander, or a boy goose, who had been privy to the plot, who had known about this idea, had confessed his guilt to Squealer and immediately committed suicide by swallowing deadly nightshade berries. Now, if you've ever seen the Hunger Games movie, you're familiar with this. So a gander is a male goose. He confessed this evil deed, and then he picked up some berries and ate them up. But they weren't just any berries, they were poisonous berries. That's exactly what Katniss and, Blondie were doing at the end of Hunger Games, trying to say, you know what, if we can't both win, we'll commit suicide. Fortunately, they did not. Phew. But the goose did not get away so easy. The animals now also learned that Snowball had never, as many of them had believed hitherto or up until then, received the Order of Animal Hero First Class. This was merely a legend which had been spread some time after the Battle of the Cowshed by Snowball himself. So far from being decorated, he had been censured or yelled at for showing cowardice in the battle. Cowardice is meaning he was not brave. So they had yelled at him for being a coward, for not being brave. Once again, some of the animals heard this with a certain bewilderment. Bewilderment means confusion. So the animals were like, hold up, I don't think that's how it went. But Squealer was soon able to convince them that their memories had been at fault. In the autumn, by a tremendous, exhausting effort, for the harvest had to be gathered at almost the same time, the windmill was finished. Finally! The machinery had still to be installed, and Whymper was negotiating the purchase of it, but the structure was completed. Wow, the animals must feel amazing now. In the teeth of every difficulty, in spite of inexperience, of primitive elements, of bad luck, and of Snowball's treachery, the work had been finished punctually, on time, to the very day. Tired out but proud, the animals walked round and round their masterpiece, which appeared even more beautiful in their eyes than when it had been built the first time. Moreover, the walls were twice as thick as before. Nothing short of explosives or bombs would lay them low this time. And when they thought of how they had labored, what discouragements they had overcome, and the enormous difference that would be made in their lives when the sails were turning and the dynamos running, when it was up and running and making energy, when they thought of all this, their tiredness forsook or left them, and they gamboled, they ran round and round the windmill, uttering cries of triumph. Napoleon himself, attended by the dogs and his cockerel, came down to inspect the completed work. He personally congratulated the animals on their achievement and announced that the mill would be named, you guessed it, Napoleon Mill. 2 days later, the animals were called together for a special meeting in the barn. They were struck dumb with surprise. They were just knocked off their socks with surprise when Napoleon announced that he had sold the pile of timber to Frederick. What? Wait, death to Frederick? Frederick is so evil, he's a scoundrel, Frederick? The very same. Tomorrow, Frederick's wagons would arrive and begin carting it away. Throughout the whole period of his seeming friendship with Pilkington, Napoleon had really been in secret agreement with Frederick. Now, if you're thinking, boy, this sounds ridiculous, wait till you learn about the Soviet Union's World War II history. Clue. Remember that Frederick represents Nazi Germany, and Pilkington represents the United States and the United Kingdom at that same time period. So Napoleon had really been in secret agreement with Frederick. All relationships with Foxwood, remember that's Pilkington's farm, had been broken off. Insulting messages had been sent to Pilkington. The pigeons had been told to avoid Pinchfield Farm and to alter their slogan from death to Frederick to death to Pilkington. At the same time, Napoleon assured the animals that the stories of an impending or upcoming attack on Animal Farm were completely untrue, and that the tales about Frederick's cruelty to his own animals had been greatly exaggerated. All those rumors had probably originated with Snowball and his agents. It now appeared that Snowball was not, after all, hiding on Pinchfield Farm, and in fact had never been there in his life. He was living in considerable luxury, so it was said, at Foxwood, and had in reality been a pensioner of Pilkington for years past. A pensioner is a person who receives money even after they've retired from active work. The pigs were in ecstasies. They were so happy over Napoleon's cunning, his brainy trickery. By seeming to be friendly with Pilkington, he had forced Frederick to raise his price by 12 pounds. Now that's, pounds are money in this instance. It's British money. But the superior quality of Napoleon's mind, said Squealer, was shown in the fact that he trusted nobody, not even Frederick. Frederick had wanted to pay for the timber with something called a check, which it seemed was a piece of paper with a promise to pay written upon it. So you might have seen people write these out. You usually tend to write out checks nowadays for maybe bills, and it's basically a way for you to pay somebody and not have to use cash. It's like the old school way of using a credit card. We don't need to go into economics debate right now. But it's a legit form of monetary transfer. But Napoleon was like, nah, we ain't trying to play that way. But Napoleon was too clever for him. He had demanded payment in real £5 notes, so real $5 bills, basically, which were to be handed over before the timber was removed. Already, Frederick had paid up, and the sum he had paid was just enough to buy the machinery for the windmill. Meanwhile, the timber was being carted away at high speed. When it was all gone, another special meeting was held in the barn for the animals to inspect Frederick's banknotes. Smiling beatifically, like with just real happiness, and wearing both his decorations, right, his animal form first class and second class, Napoleon reposed or laid out on a bed of straw on the platform with the money at his side, neatly piled on a china dish from the farmhouse kitchen. So they put it on like a plate from the kitchen. Okay. The animals filed or walked slowly past, and each gazed his fill, each looked as much as he wanted. And Boxer put out his nose to sniff at the banknotes, and the flimsy, white things stirred and rustled in his breath. Now, one of your questions for chapter 8 is about how does Frederick trick Napoleon? It has nothing to do with how badly he wanted the timber. Let's take a look at this line. And Boxer put out his nose to sniff at the banknotes, and the flimsy, white things stirred and rustled in his breath. Y'all, let's take a look at some British money. How would you describe these? What colors describe them? Would you say that they're white? I don't think so. So what we have here is 3 days later, there was a terrible hullabaloo, a great big ruckus. Whimper, his face deadly pale, came racing up the path on his bicycle, flung it down in the yard, and rushed straight into the farmhouse. The next moment, a choking roar of rage sounded from Napoleon's apartment. The news of what had happened sped round the farm like wildfire. The banknotes were forgeries! The money was fake. It was flimsy white things. What does this show about Napoleon? He didn't even know that it was fake money. The banknotes were forgeries! Frederick had got the timber for nothing! Uh-oh. How's Napoleon gonna act about this? Napoleon called the animals together immediately and in a terrible voice pronounced the death sentence upon Frederick. When captured, he said, Frederick should be boiled alive. At the same time, he warned them that after this treacherous deed, the worst was to be expected. Frederick and his men might make their long-expected attack at any moment. Sentinels or guards were placed at all the approaches to the farm. In addition, 4 pigeons were sent to Foxwood, so the other farm, Pilkington's farm, with a conciliatory message, with a message of peace, which it was hoped might reestablish good relations with Pilkington. The very next morning, the attack came. Who's attacking? Who do you think it is? I think it's Frederick. The very next morning, the attack came. The animals were at breakfast when the lookouts came racing in with the news that Frederick and his followers had already come through the 5-barred gate. Boldly enough, the animals sallied forth or went forth to meet them, but this time they did not have the easy victory that they had had in the Battle of the Cowshed. There were 15 men, with half a dozen guns between them, with 6 guns between them, and they opened fire as soon as they got within 50 yards. So the men started shooting right away. The animals could not face the terrible explosions and the stinging pellets, and in spite of the efforts of Napoleon and Boxer to rally them, they were soon driven back. A number of them were already wounded. They took refuge or they hid out in the farm buildings and peeped cautiously out from chinks and knotholes, so from little spaces between the boards that make up the wall. The whole of the big pasture, including the windmill, was in the hands of the enemy. For the moment, even Napoleon seemed at a loss. He paced up and down without a word, his tail rigid and twitching. Wistful glances were sent in the direction of Foxwood. Wistful is kind of like, boy, I wish and hope that something good would happen. If Pilkington and his men would help them, the day might yet be won. But at this moment, the 4 pigeons who had been sent out on the day before returned, one of them bearing a scrap of paper from Pilkington. On it was penciled the words, "Serves you right." So serves you right is what you say when someone is being a total jerk to you and they're like, "Oh boy, can you help me please?" And you're like, no, you deserved this." Okay, that's what Pilkington is saying. Meanwhile, Frederick and his men had halted about the windmill, so they were stopped right around it. The animals watched them, and a murmur of dismay, so a little like whisper of sadness, went round. Two of the men had produced a crowbar and a sledgehammer. They were going to knock the windmill down. "Impossible!" So they've got tools, right? "Impossible!" cried Napoleon. "We have built the walls far too thick for that. They could not knock it down in a week. Courage, comrades!" But Benjamin was watching the movements of the men intently, just really focused. The two with the hammer and the crowbar were drilling a hole near the base of the windmill, which isn't what you'd expect if they wanted to, knock it down, right? Slowly, and with an air almost of amusement, like almost as if this is funny, Benjamin nodded his long muzzle, his face, right? "I thought so," he said. "Do you not see what they are doing? In another moment, they're going to pack blasting powder into that hole." "What? What are they going to do?" "Hold up. Benjamin thinks this is almost funny. So these guys have used a sledgehammer, a large, really heavy hammer, and a crowbar, and they've made a little hole at the bottom of the windmill. And in it, they put blasting powder or gunpowder. What do you think is going to happen? Let's find out. Terrified, the animals waited. It was impossible now to venture or go out of the shelter of the buildings. After a few minutes, the men were seen to be running in all directions. Then there was a deafening roar. The pigeons swirled into the air, and all the animals except Napoleon flung themselves flat on their bellies and hid their faces. When they got up again, a huge cloud of black smoke was hanging where the windmill had been. Slowly, the breeze drifted it away. The windmill had ceased to exist. Oh man, all their work. At this sight, the animals' courage returned to them. The fear and despair they had felt a moment earlier were drowned in their rage against this vile, this evil, contemptible act. A mighty cry for vengeance, for revenge, went up, and without waiting for further orders, they charged forth in a body, all together as one, and made straight for the enemy. This time they did not heed. They didn't notice the cruel pellets that swept over them like hail. It was a savage, bitter battle. The men fired again and again, and when the animals got to close quarters, lashed out with their sticks and their heavy boots. So as soon as the animals got close enough, they stopped shooting at them, because I guess it didn't make sense anymore. They started kicking them and hitting with sticks. A cow, 3 sheep, and 2 geese were killed, and nearly everyone was wounded. Even Napoleon, who was directing operations from the rear, who was managing stuff, had the tip of his tail chipped by a pellet. But the men did not go unscathed either. Unscathed means they unharmed, basically. So they did not go unharmed, so that they did get hurt, right? 3 of them had their heads broken by blows from Boxer's hoof. Another was gored or poked in the belly by a cow's horn, so it's stabbed into. Another had his trousers, his pants, nearly torn off by Jessie and Bluebell. Remember, those are the dogs. The older dogs, right? And then the 9 dogs of Napoleon's own bodyguard, whom he had instructed to make a detour or to kind of go around under cover of the hedge, suddenly appeared on the men's flank, on their side, baying, howling ferociously, and panic overtook them. They saw that they were in danger. The humans were in danger of being surrounded. Frederick shouted to his men to get out while the going was good, and the next moment the cowardly enemy was running for dear life. The animals chased them right down to the bottom of the field and got in some last kicks at them as they forced their way through the thorn hedge. They had won, but they were weary. They were tired and bleeding. Some had begun to limp back towards the farm. The sight of their dead comrades stretched upon the grass moved some of them to tears, and for a little while they halted in sorrowful or sad silence at the place where the windmill had once stood. Yes, it was gone. Almost the last trace, the last fiber of their labor was gone. Even the foundations were partially destroyed. And in rebuilding it, they could not this time, as before, make use of the fallen stones. This time the stones had vanished too. The force of the explosion had flung them to distances of hundreds of yards. It was as though the windmill had never been. Wow. As they approached the farm, Squealer, who had unaccountably been absent during the fighting, so who had, without a good reason, not showed up, came skipping towards them, whisking his tail and beaming with satisfaction. And the animals heard, from the direction of the farm buildings, the solemn booming of a gun. "What is that gun firing for?" said Boxer. "Well, to celebrate our victory!" cried Squealer. "What victory?" said Boxer. His knees were bleeding. He had lost a shoe and split his hoof, and a dozen pellets, or little pieces of the shotgun. Remember the tiny little pieces that come out of the shotgun instead of a big bullet? It's like tiny little pellets, had lodged themselves in his hind leg. "What victory, comrade? Have we not driven the enemy off our soil, the sacred soil of Animal Farm?" "But they have destroyed the windmill, and we had worked on it for 2 years.
"What matter?" Remember, this is Squealer. "We will build another windmill. We will build 6 windmills if we feel like it. You do not appreciate, comrade, the mighty thing that we have done. The enemy was in occupation. They had control of it. Occupation of this very ground that we stand upon. And now, thanks to the leadership of Comrade Napoleon, we have won every inch of it back again."
"Then we have won back what we had before," said Boxer.
"That is our victory."
They limped into the yard. The pellets under the skin of Boxer's legs smarted or stung painfully. He saw ahead of him the heavy labor of rebuilding the windmill from the foundations. And already in imagination he braced himself for the task. He started to get ready for it. But for the first time it occurred to him that he was 11 years old, and that perhaps his great muscles were not quite what they had once been. So 11 years old is pretty old for a horse. 12 to 15 is their general lifespan. So maybe he's not strong enough anymore. Before we move on, I want to introduce you to the idea of a Pyrrhic victory. So this is something that it means you've won, but at a huge cost, right? So in these couple of comics are, one is more of a political cartoon, and the other is kind of a silly Garfield one, right? Hot pepper eating contest? Oh yeah, I'm totally gonna win. Oh my gosh, I won, but boy, I'm not happy about it. That's a Pyrrhic victory. So let's come back. All right, so Boxer's starting to think about, maybe I'm kind of old, but let's see how the pigs are. But when the animals saw the green flag flying, remember the green flag of Animal Farm, and heard the gun firing again, 7 times it was fired in all, and heard the speech that Napoleon made, congratulating them on their conduct, on their behavior, it did seem to them, after all, that they had won a great victory. The animals slain in the battle were given a solemn, a very serious funeral. Boxer and Clover pulled the wagon, which served as a hearse. A hearse is the vehicle that moves around coffins and dead bodies in respect to a funeral. And Napoleon himself walked at the head of the procession. 2 whole days were given over to celebrations. There were songs, speeches, and more firing of the gun, and a special gift of an apple was bestowed or given on every animal, with 2 ounces of corn for each bird and 3 biscuits for each dog. It was announced that the battle would be called the Battle of the Windmill, and that Napoleon had created a new decoration, the Order of the Green Banner, which he conferred or gave upon himself. In the general rejoicings, the unfortunate affair of the banknotes was forgotten. So, remember, Frederick gave them fake money. Then they have this terrible battle. And suddenly they've forgotten about the banknotes, about the fake money that Frederick gave them. It was a few days later than this that the pigs came upon a case of whiskey in the cellars of the farmhouse. It had been overlooked at the time when the house was first occupied. That night there came from the farmhouse the sound of loud singing, in which, to everyone's surprise, the strains of Beasts of England were mixed up. I thought that was banned. And now who's singing it? Wait, who lives in the farmhouse again? Oh, it's the pigs. At about 9:30 at night, right, Napoleon, wearing an old bowler hat of Mr. Jones, was distinctly seen to emerge from the back door, gallop rapidly round the yard, and disappear indoors again. What a silly thing to do. But in the morning, a deep silence hung over the farmhouse. Not a pig appeared to be stirring or moving. It was nearly 9 o'clock, which is pretty late in the day for a farm. It was nearly 9 o'clock when Squealer made his appearance, walking slowly and dejectedly, like almost sad, his eyes dull, his tail hanging limply behind him, and with every appearance of being seriously ill. He called the animals together and told them that he had a terrible piece of news to impart. Comrade Napoleon was dying. Now, I want you to think about that. Is he really dying? Let's find out. A cry of lamentation, of sadness went up. Straw was laid down outside the doors of the farmhouse, and the animals walked on tiptoe. So if you were to lay straw down outside the doors, it would make the footsteps quieter. With tears in their eyes, they asked one another what they should do if their leader were taken away from them. A rumor went round that Snowball had, after all, contrived or managed to introduce poison into Napoleon's food. At 11 o'clock, Squealer came out to make another announcement. As his last act upon earth, Comrade Napoleon had pronounced a solemn decree, a very serious announcement. The drinking of alcohol was to be punished by death. By the evening, however, Napoleon appeared to be somewhat better, and the following morning Squealer was able to tell them all that he was well on the way to recovery. By the evening of that day, Napoleon was back at work, and on the next day it was learned that he had instructed Whymper to purchase in Willingdon, right in the town, some booklets on brewing and distilling. Brewing is the process by which you make beer, and distilling is the process by which you make alcohol, like rum or whiskey. Wonder what they intend to do with those. A week later, Napoleon gave orders that the small paddock, right, the little field beyond the orchard, which had previously been intended to set aside as grazing ground for animals who were past work as a retirement home, was to be plowed up. It was given out that the pasture was exhausted and needed reseeding, which means, like, basically it couldn't grow good grass anymore, and they were going to, like, freshen it up. But it soon became known that Napoleon intended to sow it with barley. I wonder what barley is used for. Okay, it's used for making beer and liquor. So, what do you think they're going to do? About this time, there occurred a strange incident which hardly anyone was able to understand. Pay attention, this is important. One night at about 12 o'clock, there was a loud crash in the yard, and the animals rushed out of their stalls. It was a moonlit night. At the foot of the end wall of the big barn, where the 7 commandments were written, there lay a ladder broken in 2 pieces. Squealer, temporarily stunned, was sprawling or laying beside it, and near at hand there lay a lantern, like a light source, a paintbrush, and an overturned pot of white paint. What do you think he was doing? The dogs immediately made a ring round Squealer and escorted him back to the farmhouse as soon as he was able to walk. None of the animals could form any idea as to what this meant, except old Benjamin, who nodded his muzzle with a knowing air and seemed to understand, but would say nothing. But a few days later, Muriel, reading over the 7 commandments to herself, noted that there was yet another of them which the animals had remembered wrong. They had thought the 5th commandment was, "No animal shall drink alcohol." But there were 2 words that they had forgotten. Actually, the commandment read, "No animal shall drink alcohol to excess." No animal shall have too much alcohol. Wonder what happened.